The person everyone ignored that morning was someone who had spent his entire life defending justice. The crowded halls of Chicago O'Hare International Airport moved with their usual rhythm. Travelers hurried toward their gates, families checked their flight information, and business professionals carried briefcases through the endless flow of people. Among them was David Carter, a quiet man walking through the terminal with a leather briefcase in one hand and a calm expression on his face. To everyone around him, he looked like any other passenger preparing for a flight. Nobody stopped to ask about his story. Nobody knew the years of dedication behind his quiet presence. Nobody knew that David was a United States federal judge whose decisions had impacted lives and whose career had been built around the principles of fairness and truth. But on that morning, his title was invisible. His achievements were invisible. All people could see was the person standing in front of them. And sometimes, the most powerful stories begin when the world does not recognize someone's true identity. Officer Michael Anderson worked airport security and had spent years believing that awareness was the foundation of his job. In a place where thousands of people passed through every day, he believed his responsibility was to notice details, evaluate situations, and make decisions quickly. Experience had taught him to trust his instincts, but experience could only reveal what someone had learned to notice. Sometimes, the most important details were the ones hidden beneath the surface. David understood that better than most people. His entire career had been built around listening before deciding, examining facts before reaching conclusions, and understanding that every person carried a story that could not be seen immediately. Inside courtrooms, he had witnessed how easily assumptions could influence opinions. He had learned that justice required patience. It required looking beyond the first impression. That same belief guided him as he walked through the airport that day. When Michael noticed David, he saw only the situation in front of him. He did not know the man's background. He did not know his career. He did not know the responsibility that came with the quiet passenger standing nearby. David noticed the officer approaching, but he remained composed. He had no desire to create a scene. He had no need to announce his position. He believed respect should exist before recognition. Imagine standing in a crowded airport where thousands of people walk past you, unaware of the years you spent serving others. Imagine having the ability to immediately change the way people see you, but choosing patience because you believe truth should come through facts, not status. That was the choice David made. Above the terminal, security cameras quietly watched everything happening below. They recorded travelers, conversations, and moments that seemed ordinary at the time. Nobody knew those cameras would later become the most important witnesses to what happened. Nobody knew that the quiet man carrying a briefcase would become the center of a lesson about judgment, responsibility, and truth. For now, David remained just another passenger in a busy airport. Michael believed he understood the situation in front of him. But the complete story had not yet been revealed. And sometimes, the person people fail to recognize is the very person they should have taken the time to understand. The airport continued moving around David Carter as if nothing unusual was happening. Thousands of people passed through the terminal every day, each carrying their own destination, their own worries, and their own stories. But inside that ordinary morning, a moment was beginning that would later raise important questions about judgment, responsibility, and the power of first impressions. David remained calm as he moved through the terminal. He had spent decades learning that patience was often stronger than reaction. In a courtroom, emotions could influence decisions, but facts always mattered more. That principle had guided him throughout his career, and it continued to guide him now. Officer Michael Anderson approached the situation believing he was doing what his position required. He had worked in airport security long enough to understand that every interaction could be different. He believed awareness meant paying attention to details and making decisions when necessary. However, there was one detail he did not know yet. The quiet passenger in front of him was not just another traveler. He was a person whose entire professional life had been dedicated to protecting fairness and understanding within the legal system. But David did not reveal that information. He did not introduce himself by his title. He did not expect special treatment because of his position. To him, Respect was not something that should only appear after someone discovered a person's achievements. Respect was something every person deserved from the beginning. The difference between David and Michael was not simply their roles in that moment. It was the way they viewed the situation. Michael saw a brief encounter that required a quick response. David saw a moment that required patience and careful understanding. Neither person knew that the security cameras above the terminal were quietly recording every detail. The cameras did not recognize titles. They did not recognize appearances. They simply captured what happened. In a world where people often make decisions based on limited information, evidence becomes the bridge between assumptions and reality. David had spent his life working with that exact idea. Every case had more than one perspective. Every person had more than one chapter in their story. The first thing people noticed was rarely the complete truth. As the situation continued, some travelers nearby began to notice the interaction. Some looked briefly before returning to their own plans. Others continued walking, unaware that an important lesson was unfolding in front of them. That was often how life worked. The biggest moments did not always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes they appeared quietly in places where people least expected them. Imagine being judged before anyone knows your journey. Imagine having the ability to immediately reveal your identity, yet choosing not to because you believe truth should be discovered through understanding rather than status. That was the choice David made. He trusted that facts would eventually speak, louder than assumptions. Meanwhile, Michael remained confident that he understood the situation. He believed he was seeing everything clearly. But the human eye can only see what is directly in front of it. The complete story often waits beyond the first glance. Above them, the security cameras continued recording. Every movement, every moment, and every detail was being preserved. Nobody in the terminal realized that those recordings would soon become the silent witnesses that changed how everyone viewed what happened that day. The morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport continued as thousands of travelers moved through the terminal without knowing that a quiet moment was about to reveal a much larger lesson. David Carter remained composed, carrying himself with the same patience that had defined his entire career. He had spent years inside courtrooms where every decision required careful thought, complete information, and respect for the truth. He knew that a single moment could never explain an entire person. Yet outside the courtroom, he understood that many people did not always have the time or patience to look deeper. Officer Michael Anderson continued to view the situation from his own perspective. He believed he was responding to what he saw in front of him. His experience had taught him to notice certain details quickly, especially in a busy environment where thousands of people moved through the airport every day. But experience can sometimes create confidence before understanding. The more familiar a person becomes with making decisions, the easier it can be to forget that every situation still deserves a complete picture. David noticed the difference between being heard and being understood. He had seen it many times throughout his legal career. People often wanted immediate answers, immediate conclusions, and immediate explanations. But justice was rarely found in the first few seconds of a situation. Justice came from taking the time to examine everything. That was why David remained patient. He knew his identity did not need to be announced in order for the truth to matter. His position as a federal judge was important, but it was not the reason he deserved respect. He deserved respect because he was a person. The security cameras above the terminal continued recording quietly. They captured the movements of travelers, the conversations around them, and the details that most people would never remember. Those cameras had no opinions. They did not make assumptions. They simply preserved the moment exactly as it happened. In many situations, the truth is not lost because it disappears. The truth is lost because people stop looking before they find it. That was the difference between what people believed and what the evidence could reveal. As the interaction continued, David remained calm while Michael remained confident in his own understanding. Neither of them knew how important those few minutes would become. Neither of them knew that the ordinary security footage above them would later provide the missing pieces of the story. Imagine standing in a place where everyone sees only one small part of who you are. Imagine carrying a lifetime of achievements and experiences while the world only sees a brief moment. That was the reality David faced that morning. But instead of reacting with frustration, he chose patience because he understood something powerful. Truth does not become stronger when it is announced. Truth becomes stronger when it is proven. The airport continued its normal rhythm. Flights departed. Travelers arrived. Announcements echoed through the halls. But behind the scenes, every detail was being preserved. The cameras were watching. The evidence was waiting. And the complete story was still unfolding. The airport terminal continued to move around David Carter and Officer Michael Anderson. But the meaning of the moment was becoming deeper with every passing second. To most travelers nearby, it looked like another ordinary interaction inside a busy airport. People continued walking toward their gates, checking their phones, carrying luggage, and preparing for their flights. They had no idea that above them, hidden among the lights and signs of the terminal, security cameras were quietly preserving every detail. David remained calm because he understood something that many people often forget. The truth does not need to rush. It only needs the opportunity to be seen clearly. Throughout his years as a federal judge, David had learned that evidence was the foundation of fairness. In his courtroom, decisions were never made from a single impression or incomplete information. Every side mattered. Every detail mattered. Every person deserved to be understood before being judged. That same principle guided him in the airport that morning. He could have immediately explained who he was. He could have revealed his position and changed the way people looked at him. But he chose not to. Not because his title was unimportant, but because he believed respect should not depend on someone's achievements. A person's dignity should exist before anyone knows their background. Officer Michael Anderson continued believing that he understood the situation. His years working in airport security had taught him to pay attention and respond quickly. He believed he was simply doing his responsibility. But every person in a position of authority faces the same challenge: knowing when confidence becomes too comfortable. Sometimes, the hardest lesson is realizing that seeing something is not the same as understanding everything. Michael did not know the complete story of the person standing in front of him. He did not know the years of service behind David's quiet expression. He did not know that the man he viewed as just another traveler had spent his life studying the meaning of justice. Meanwhile, the security cameras continued their silent work. They captured the entire interaction without emotion or assumption. They recorded what happened, not what people believed happened. That difference would become important, because when memories conflict and perspectives differ, evidence becomes the voice that brings clarity. Imagine a moment where everyone around you thinks they understand the situation, but the most important details are the ones they cannot see yet. Imagine knowing the truth will eventually appear, but choosing patience instead of demanding immediate recognition. That was the strength David carried with him. He understood that real authority was not about proving power. It was about remaining steady when others misunderstood you. As the minutes passed, the airport continued its normal rhythm. Travelers moved through the terminal, announcements echoed across the halls, and flights prepared for departure. But something important was already happening quietly. The cameras had captured the moment. The evidence had been preserved. The truth was waiting. And soon, the story that began with assumptions would be viewed through a completely different lens. The quiet recording continued inside the airport terminal, capturing a moment that most people would have forgotten if not for the evidence waiting to be discovered. David Carter remained composed, standing with the same patience he had shown from the beginning. He did not know exactly how others viewed the situation, but he understood something important. A person cannot control every assumption made about them. The only thing a person can control is how they respond. For David, the answer was always the same: stay calm, stay respectful, let the truth speak. Throughout his career as a federal judge, David had witnessed countless situations where the first version of a story was incomplete. He had seen how quickly opinions could form before all the facts were available. That experience taught him that patience was not weakness. Patience was discipline. It was the ability to trust that a complete picture would eventually appear. Officer Michael Anderson continued believing he had a clear understanding of what was happening. He trusted his observations and his training. He believed he was handling the situation based on the information available to him. But the difference between a quick judgment and a fair judgment often comes down to one simple question. Did someone take the time to look deeper? The answer was hidden above the terminal. The security cameras had recorded everything from a perspective no person standing nearby could have. They had captured the timing, the movements, and the details that were easy to miss in the middle of a busy airport. They were silent witnesses with no opinions and no assumptions. They simply preserved the truth. A supervisor eventually became aware that the situation required a closer review. Standard procedures meant that details needed to be examined carefully before conclusions could be reached. The security footage was requested, and the ordinary cameras that watched thousands of travelers every day suddenly became the center of attention. Nobody expected those recordings to carry such importance. Nobody knew that the answers were already waiting in a place almost everyone ignored. Imagine a situation where people believe they understand what happened because they only saw one small piece of it. Imagine discovering that the missing details completely changed the meaning of the entire moment. That was the power of evidence. It did not create a new story. It revealed the story that had been there all along. David did not wait for recognition. He did not demand that anyone immediately understand his position. He knew that a title could explain a career, but it could never replace character. The way someone responds during difficult moments often reveals more than any introduction ever could. Michael was about to discover that the person he thought he understood was someone he had never truly seen. Not because David had hidden who he was, but because nobody had taken the time to look beyond the surface. The footage was ready to be reviewed. The facts were waiting. And inside that airport, the difference between assumption and truth was about to become impossible to ignore. The review of the security footage began quietly, but everyone in the room understood that the next few minutes could change the way the entire situation was remembered. The screen displayed the airport terminal exactly as it had been moments earlier. Travelers moved through the background. Lights reflected across the polished floors. Announcements continued echoing through the busy halls. It looked like an ordinary morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. But inside that small review room, the difference between assumption and reality was becoming clear. David Carter watched the footage with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the entire encounter. He did not look for a moment of victory. He did not search for a reason to embarrass anyone. His focus was simple: let the facts be seen. That mindset came from decades of serving as a federal judge. David had spent his career understanding that justice required more than opinions. It required patience, evidence, and a willingness to examine the complete picture. The footage showed what people nearby could not see from their limited perspective. It revealed details that were easy to miss during a quick interaction. It showed the importance of looking beyond the first impression. Officer Michael Anderson watched carefully as the recording continued. The confidence he had carried earlier began to change into reflection. He realized that his understanding of the situation had been based on only a small part of the available information. The footage did not attack his character. It simply provided a clearer view of what had happened. That was the purpose of evidence. It did not exist to create humiliation. It existed to create understanding. David knew this better than anyone. In his courtroom, he had seen people make mistakes, misunderstand situations, and reach conclusions too quickly. But he also knew that growth became possible when people were willing to recognize what they had missed. The security footage became more than a recording. It became a reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can immediately see. Imagine believing you understand a person after only a few seconds, then discovering that those seconds never showed the full truth. Imagine realizing that the person you judged quickly had spent a lifetime studying the very principles of fairness and justice. That realization can change the way someone sees the world. The room remained quiet as the footage continued playing. Nobody needed to raise their voice. Nobody needed to create more conflict. The evidence itself was enough. David's identity as a federal judge was no longer a mystery, but the most important lesson was not his title. The most important lesson was how he carried himself before anyone knew who he was. He had chosen patience when he could have demanded recognition. He had chosen respect when he could have focused on being respected. Michael began to understand that authority was not only about having responsibility over others. It was also about having responsibility toward others. The cameras had recorded a moment inside an airport, but the lesson reached much further. It showed that truth does not depend on who speaks the loudest. It does not depend on appearance or assumption. It depends on what the evidence reveals. And as the final moments of the recording appeared on the screen, everyone in that room understood that the story they first thought they knew was only the beginning. The review room remained silent after the final moments of the security footage appeared on the screen. Everyone present understood that the recording had changed the way they viewed the situation, but the most important realization was not about one person being right or wrong. It was about how easily a complete story could be missed when people only saw a small part of the picture. David Carter remained calm as he watched the reactions around him. He had seen moments like this throughout his years as a federal judge. People often wanted simple answers, but justice was rarely simple. Real understanding required patience, honesty, and the willingness to accept information that challenged what someone first believed. Officer Michael Anderson looked at the footage with a different perspective than before. The recording did not just show what happened inside the airport. It showed how important it was to slow down and consider every detail before reaching a conclusion. Michael had always believed that responsibility meant making decisions when situations required action. But now he began to understand that responsibility also meant recognizing when a decision needed another look. A position of authority came with expectations, but it also came with a duty to remain open to learning. David noticed the change in the room, but he did not view it as a personal victory. He had no interest in making another person feel defeated. His purpose had never been to prove that his title was more important than someone else's. His purpose was to show that every person deserved fairness before assumptions were made. That belief had guided him through his entire career. He understood that mistakes could happen, but improvement could only happen when people were willing to acknowledge them. Imagine spending your life studying the meaning of justice, then finding yourself in a situation where the same principles are suddenly applied to you. Imagine having the ability to reveal your position immediately, but choosing instead to let evidence speak first. That choice showed the difference between having authority and understanding responsibility. David carried the respect of his position quietly. He did not need to announce his achievements because his character was already visible through his actions. Michael began to understand that a badge represented responsibility, not perfection. The role of an officer was not only about making decisions. It was also about making those decisions with awareness, fairness, and respect for every individual. The lesson from the footage extended beyond the airport terminal. It was not only about what happened during one interaction. It was about how people see each other every day. First impressions can be incomplete. Assumptions can be wrong. And the truth often requires patience before it becomes clear. The security footage had done exactly what evidence is meant to do. It removed uncertainty and allowed everyone to see the complete picture. Outside the review room, the airport continued operating as normal. Travelers moved between gates. Flights continued arriving and departing. The world around them did not stop. But inside that room, something important had changed. A moment that began with misunderstanding had become a lesson about accountability, humility, and the responsibility that comes with power. David walked away without seeking attention, and Michael walked away with a new understanding. The camera had captured the event, but the greater message was something deeper. True justice is not about who has the most power. It is about who is willing to seek the truth. The days after the airport incident carried a different kind of silence. The security footage had answered the questions that many people thought they already understood, but the most important part of the moment was not the recording itself. It was what people chose to do after seeing the truth. David Carter returned to his responsibilities with the same calm determination that had guided him for decades. He never viewed the situation as an opportunity to gain attention. He never wanted people to remember him only because of what happened inside an airport terminal. He wanted them to remember the lesson behind it. To David, justice was not about creating winners and losers. Justice was about making sure every person had the opportunity to be seen clearly and treated fairly. That belief had shaped his entire career as a federal judge. He had spent years listening to difficult stories, examining complicated situations, and reminding others that every decision carried responsibility. Now, he had experienced a moment that reflected the same principles he had defended in courtrooms across the country. Officer Michael Anderson also carried the memory of that day with him. The footage had given him something more valuable than a simple answer. It had given him perspective. He began to understand that people in positions of authority must always be willing to examine their own actions. Experience and training were important, but humility was equally important. A person could have years of knowledge and still miss something when they only looked at one part of a situation. Michael realized that true professionalism was not about never making mistakes. It was about having the courage to learn from them. The difference between power and leadership became clearer. Power could influence a moment, but leadership could influence the future. David had demonstrated that lesson without raising his voice or demanding recognition. He showed that strength could exist in patience. He showed that confidence did not need to come from control. It could come from knowing that the truth would eventually speak for itself. Imagine being given the choice between proving someone wrong and helping someone understand. Imagine having the ability to focus on personal satisfaction, but choosing instead to focus on a larger lesson. That was the choice David made. He understood that lasting change did not come from embarrassment. It came from awareness. The people who learned about the situation saw something bigger than an airport encounter. They saw a reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can immediately recognize. A person's appearance does not reveal their experiences. A first impression does not reveal their character. And a single moment does not define an entire life. The security footage became a symbol of accountability, but it also became a symbol of opportunity. It showed that truth could correct misunderstandings and create a path toward improvement. David and Michael came from very different positions in that moment, but both had something important to learn. One showed the power of dignity under pressure. The other discovered the importance of reflection. The airport continued its daily routine, and most travelers moved on without ever knowing the full story. But for those who witnessed it, the lesson remained clear. Justice is not only found in courtrooms or official decisions. It is found in everyday choices, in the willingness to listen, and in the courage to look beyond what appears obvious. Because sometimes the most powerful change begins when someone finally chooses to see the complete truth. The story that began inside a busy airport terminal eventually became a reminder of something much larger than one moment between two people. Days passed, flights continued to arrive and depart, and thousands of travelers moved through the same halls where the truth had finally been revealed. For most people, it was just another day at the airport. But for David Carter and Officer Michael Anderson, that moment created a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. David returned to his work with the same quiet dedication that had guided him for decades. As a federal judge, he understood that justice was not only about laws, decisions, or courtrooms. Justice was also about how people treated each other in everyday situations. He knew that a person's value should never depend on how others first perceived them. A title could describe someone's career, but could never fully describe their character. What mattered most was the way a person carried themselves when no one expected recognition. That was what made David's response so powerful. He had every opportunity to focus on being proven right, but he chose something greater. He chose understanding. He chose to show that dignity was not something given only after people discovered someone's importance. Dignity belonged to everyone from the beginning. Michael Anderson continued reflecting on what happened. The security footage had shown him a perspective he could not see in the moment. It reminded him that responsibility was not only about making decisions quickly. It was also about making sure those decisions were fair. His role required awareness, but it also required humility. He learned that authority became stronger when it was guided by respect. The lesson was not about one person being defeated and another person being victorious. It was about recognizing the importance of growth. Everyone has moments when they must look deeper, question their assumptions, and become better than they were before. Imagine a world where every person was judged only by the first few seconds someone saw them. How many stories would remain unknown? How many achievements would remain invisible? How many opportunities for understanding would disappear? That was why this moment mattered. It showed that people are always more than what others see at first glance. The security cameras captured the facts, but the deeper message came from what happened afterward. David showed that true strength does not require anger or recognition. It comes from patience, confidence, and trust in the truth. Michael learned that real professionalism requires more than knowledge. It requires the willingness to listen, reflect, and improve. The airport remained the same place it had always been. Travelers continued walking through the terminals. Announcements continued filling the air. Life moved forward. But the lesson from that day remained. A person's appearance does not tell their entire story. A single interaction does not define their entire character. And a moment of misunderstanding can become an opportunity for something better when people choose truth over assumptions. In the end, the cameras did more than record an encounter. They preserved a reminder that justice is not only found in official decisions. It is found in everyday choices, in fairness, and in the courage to see people as they truly are. The truth was there from the beginning. It only needed someone willing to look beyond the surface.